So the cost of stopping the natural flooding process on agricultural land is significant. On the Nile River, they did build what was called the Aswan Dam, Aswan Dam, the high dam, and essentially it trapped all the sediment upstream. It cut down on the flooding and generated a lot of cheap electricity. So it had some good things happen with the dam, the flood controls. But as we've seen in the States during that previous one, it's pretty hard to manage them just right. How much longer is it going to rain? How much water do I let out now? Do I let out enough to handle the rain if it comes? And if I do let out so much, I'm going to damage some other people. So do I risk damaging them and then all of a sudden the sun clears up? Oops. Becomes a pretty difficult thing to predict. Sacrifice some people for others. In Winnipeg, they did that just last year. They actually released floodwaters and put one community underwater because the density of development is low. And by sacrificing one small community, they saved a large community. Had the floodwaters started to subside, that would have looked really bad. So, well, we thought these guys were going to get flooded. Sorry about that. Anyway, on the Nile Delta, what has resulted there is an increase in the use of chemical fertilizers. This is what's happened as a result of the Aswan Dam. And the numbers here to look at here, these are in thousands of tons. Thousands of tons of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. And what goes in with a lot of those fertilizers, I didn't realize it, but they say 10, 10, 10. One of the things you got to ask yourself is, what is the other 70? And if you want to look on the internet and research it, it'd probably scare you. And I know it scared me when you look at the whole chemical industry and such.
Well, what kinds of things are it?
What's been told to me by somebody trying to develop fertilizers and such and market the natural fertilizers is that they're allowed to get rid of certain concentrations of nasty things in very small amounts. So if you can imagine a very old adage which has been known to be outdated, the solution to pollution is dilution. Essentially, look at what's in the other 70% of your fertilizer. But unfortunately, that adage has been turned wrong because we found out that nature tends to concentrate things and bring them back to us. As you've noticed, there's been some studies done up in Alaska about the sockeye salmon and the PCPs in the soil coming back onto land in essentially pristine areas in Alaska. And it's coming in the carcasses of the salmon. Didn't work too well. And for the most part, again, another oops, sorry we were wrong. But that adage was taught to engineers, town planners, city management, for people for decades. The solution to pollution is dilution. Sorry about that. Anyway, learning from our mistakes in the past, I just thought you might find this slide interesting. This is 1863, the Alexander Bridge, or Alexandra Bridge, depending on how you want to say it or spell it, over the Fraser River. This is what the bridge looked like in 1894 during the flood. Looked like we built it up high enough. Wouldn't want to fall off it. Essentially, you could hang your feet off it there. Not that I would want to. One of the interesting things they learned, though, when they replaced the bridge in 1915, they built it higher. This is the old concrete, or the old stone abutment here. They jacked it up a bit higher. That bridge is still there. But they learned from their mistake. Here's a quote that we came across on a very interesting website. I believe Warren found this one here. And it makes a very interesting statement here that we cannot continue to be making huge investments in 19th century technology or flood control technologies. It's time for us to implement a modern 21st century approach to managing rivers rather than the old approach of simply building the levees taller, stronger, higher, and trying to outstrip Mother Nature, because we're going to lose. We just don't have the money to do it. Flood losses in the U.S. are in the tens of billions a study in Salmon Arm. But if we're going to try and outbuild Mother Nature in Salmon Arm instead, we're going to lose. So, I don't want to leave anything on doom and gloom. There is a win-win. Something that I've learned about here, and just to clarify, I'm not a flood hydrologist. I don't do these types of studies. I hire those people to help me, and I try to get the best of the best when I am hiring people to help me, because they're essentially going to keep me out of trouble when they tell me how high the water should get. So any structures that I put in are high enough and big enough to clear these things. Sustainable floodplains through large-scale reconnection of rivers. This comes out of California, actually. This particular example, and here are the cost. Just you know, here's the cost of the flooding in the U.S. Major events in the Midwest in 1993, $30 billion in total. 2008, $15 billion. California Central Valley, 1995 and 1998 or something. $4 billion in each event. I mean, the numbers are staggering. Floods kill more people and cause more damage than anything. They're quite staggering things. So what they've done here is they've said, let the river flood. Give it room to do what it naturally does. And essentially, this should be a newsworthy event. You've got waterfowl there. That field's going to dry up in a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks, and they'll be planted again. Great. No fertilizer. Save somebody a bundle of money. Also saves, yeah, exactly.
No, I'd like to comment on that, just because I've had situations like that where I farm and all those birds come in and they just muck around and they'll ruin whatever's under that water. And that becomes a write-off.
Well, then you need
has a cost to it.
Then you need to go out with Ducks Unlimited and set up a hunting club. And then you can charge the hunters, you know, $150.
Yeah, but this is in the spring and there's no hunting season in the spring.
Well,
So you have to go out there and bang away yourself and chase them away. But what do? You chase them to the neighbors.
Well, again, this is something that should be explored, though, as far as, like, in my opinion, I don't know if we get water to these depths myself. But, and again, you're only dealing with these things for short durations and in very isolated areas. The problem comes in, as we'll show here, essentially when the water comes over and it gets trapped behind the road systems, or the water gets behind your dike, and now the water's 3 feet deep. And now you're going to get these types of, or some of these types of activities. Or you may get birds in there for a month or something like that. So we'll get through to these and then we'll talk a bit more about that, because I'm quite curious as to the types of things that can go on with the wildfowl, or with the waterfowl. So, as I said, short duration, widespread flooding of farmlands can be beneficial, or is beneficial. That's why these lands were valuable in the first place, because they flooded fairly regularly. That's why the plant growth and the biodiversity occurs in these areas. The benefits include the elimination of the needs and cost to construct and maintain flood control measures, which can be staggering. Provides the deposition of valuable nutrients on the land, eliminates the need for chemical fertilizers, which essentially these chemical fertilizers, as we see in the Salmon River and in Shuswap Lake, they have the potential to generate algae blooms. They have the potential to impact on fish habitat and the fish migration up and down our area in the streams. It also helps to maintain the hydraulic conveyance capacity of the stream. So rather than this stream having to move sediment further and further offshore, decreasing its capacity to actually move the sediment, it also decreases its capacity to move the water. So from a case history perspective, what I'm hoping that we see for the Salmon River, case history part 2, is the establishment of floodways. Rather than the current privately owned, privately maintained, if it is maintained, dike. We put in a setback dike, and we also look at implementing a field placement bylaws, so one person doing work on one land doesn't essentially adversely impact the other person who essentially has to step to the plate to do some work on their property. One of the issues, interesting things that you can see with regards to this domino effect is if you look at some of the resort areas around the world where they put big hotels out on the beaches, and they essentially during certain times of the year, they don't have great sand. So what the hotel or what the resort owners do is they build groins out into the ocean to capture the sand and keep the sand on their sandy beach so they can attract more tourists. So they put their groin out, it traps the sand there, and then behind their groin, the sand gets eaten away. So then the next resort owner downstream, he's got a cobble beach, and all the people move upstream to the next guy. Well, he's got to put a groin out in front of his place there to capture the sediment there, and then he causes a problem for the next guy down. And it just becomes a domino thing. So if you look at some of the photos of some of the places where they've done that, you've got these nice beaches with all these artificial groins going out into the ocean to capture sediment. So it's the same thing here as far as fill placement and dike construction goes. So what we're looking at here is essentially elevating 30th Street to act as a setback dike, and then increasing and permitting floodwaters to get underneath the highway. Currently there's very little opportunity for water from the Salmon River Bridge right into town. There's only, I think, 3 or 4 relatively small culverts. Some of them are only 80 centimeters in diameter. So there's really no opportunity. If the water gets out through here, it goes over 30th and into town. And there's no way to get it out. These small diameter pipes, even I think there's one in there that may be 90 centimeters or maybe slightly larger. It's only going to move maybe a cubic meter a second at best if it doesn't plug up. It's going to plug up with debris because you're going to have so much debris floating around in there. You're going to have no opportunity there. So it's actually a very real potential, a significant potential to send the water right into town, right into the downtown core of Salmon Arm. But this particular solution here that I think should be explored, the use of a setback dike and then floodways under the highway, is what I'm suggesting that the city look at. So in summary, the current management practices that we're using are outdated and they're widely recognized as being ineffective, and that's around the world. The current flood hazard risks that we're dealing with are unknown. The approval of development in the flood hazard areas, as that increases, we get an increase in risk. The more valuable things we put in that area, the risks go up. And not only to the development we're putting there, but the risks get elevated to other areas as well. So the total risk cost increases. A detailed study of the current and future flood hazards and risks is a fundamental foundation for sound land use planning in flood-prone areas or flood hazard areas. Preliminary observations indicate that there are cost-effective management strategies that are being used and implemented around the world to decrease this concept of trying to outbuild Mother Nature. And we can start looking at those things as cost-effective solutions to dealing with the flood hazards and risks in Salmon Arm. We wrap this up with the suggestion that Council consider a $50,000 budget for a flood hazard and risk study. And rather than going out and saying we want a flood hazard and risk study, send us a budget and a proposal or a cost estimate and a proposal, set a value, 50 grand is what we can afford, and then pick the best proposal. That way you'll get the best consultant. You don't need to worry about picking a consultant based on price. And just to clarify my position on this stuff, I don't do this work. I'm not on the list of candidates to do it, and I'm by no means qualified. But if they ever want to replace the culvert on Palmer Creek, that's the type of work that we do. We take out systems like this, which fish have not been able to get up Palmer Creek since the city put that culvert in. Sediment has been trapped upstream there, the channel's been degraded downstream, and we can replace it with something like that if they ever want to get around to it. These are the types of problems. People thought these were good ideas years ago, and they continue to put them in today, even though they're known to cause problems. They continue to use these types of systems. And we continue to make a living taking them out and putting those in. Perpetual livelihood there. In BC, as I mentioned, in BC there's about 100,000 of these things on fish streams that are isolated fish habitat. That, I think, concludes what I had to say with respect to flooding, and I appreciate everybody coming out to listen to the talk, and I'm glad to entertain any questions and any observations that people